Floor fighting is dangerous, and the reason it's dangerous is that it seldom ever occurs the way that we train for it to occur. Now there's three different ways you can end up on the ground. One is the one-on-one situation. This is what most of us train for. From that, there's two ways. One is you take him down. That's what we hope is going to happen. The other way is he takes you down. The second way you can end up on the floor is you and your partner take somebody else down. Ready? Now. The third option is you, him, and a few of his buddies. And if you think you're going to be rolling around on the ground while they're not doing anything, good luck. They're going to throw in their 2 cents and their size 10s. Now this last option should scare the bejeebers out of you. Somebody once said that unless the guy thinks he can get away with it, he is not going to try it. This is a good thing to remember. Most cases, the guy's going to try something, but he's going to have backup with him. Guys are going to be there just like, yeah, we'll help you, buddy. And that's where he gets his courage. 90% of judo, jiu-jitsu, and aikido are predicated on fighting on a one-on-one situation. And they're good for it. I make no disrespect towards these arts. But it's very seldom that you're going to be in a one-on-one situation. If you try a lot of these techniques, you're going to get your head split open with a beer bottle. There are some floor stylists who claim to have multiple opponent techniques, and maybe they do. But let me tell you, when I was 16, I saw a guy at a party stomped by about 10 guys, and they surrounded him and they were just stomping him down. And when they finally dragged him up to get him out of there, somebody looked at him and said, hey, he can still walk, let's break his legs. They did. This is why experienced street fighters hate going to the ground. They know this is where stompings occur. So maybe there's a martial arts master out there that has a secret technique that he can do. Let me tell you flat out, that's him. That's not you, that's not me. So what we have to do is deal with what you can do when you're on the ground right now, because that's where you're going to be in danger. Animals important safety tip number 1. Going to the ground against multiple opponents is not something you want to do. Now this is not to say that all those neat judo, jiu-jitsu throws that you've learned are useless. Far from it. Take the guy down. Maybe if you want, throw him into his buddies. That works. The thing is, don't follow him to the ground. In my book, Floor Fighting, I said that there are 3 ways to end up on the ground. The first way is slipping. It could be ice, mud, spilled beer, or whatever. You just lose your footing. It happens in real fights. You can do lots to counter this by really learning balance and footwork, and most importantly, keeping your knees bent. Number 2, you get thrown or taken down. This obviously means you're messing with the wrong person and or you weren't paying attention to what your opponent was really doing when he grabbed you there. Free safety tip here. Somebody grabbing your arm is an attack. Counterattack. Not him, but his hand. Get that hand off you now. The third way is the most common, however, and that's basically you get tackled. I've seen a lot of inexperienced fighters start fights this way. The first thing they do is plow into the guy. Obviously, this is the favorite move of expert grapplers too, so you never know when you're going to run into it. Let me point out that the third way happens a lot. Unlike sparring, where 2 guys are fighting at a distance, in real fights, the combatants close immediately and they try and overwhelm each other. A lot of times what happens is that one combatant will overwhelm the other and immediately press his advantage. However, just as often what's going to happen is that the 2 guys are going to close, they're going to clinch, and both fall over. I'd like to add a 4th way that you can end up on the ground, and that is you're doing a takedown on somebody and he grabs onto you. This happens. This is one of the main differences between the martial arts and reality. In reality, you start taking the guy over, he's going to be flailing around, he's going to reach over and grab whatever's around, and that's you. So a martial artist, however, is trained to cooperate with you. He knows what's going to happen, he's not going to do this flail, so he'll cooperate with the move when you take him down. See? That is working with a training partner. This is why anytime you do some sort of takedown, you have to keep your guard up because that guy will flail. It's a human reaction for him to flail and grab. The other alternative on ending up on the ground in this situation is really ugly, and that is you've muckled onto a trained fighter. This is the guy who has intentionally grabbed onto you. Going to the ground with a trained fighter is not a pleasant experience. Tim and I once had a slight misunderstanding where we went down to the ground. We thought we were somebody else. On the way down to the ground, he had his arm across my throat. I had my elbow up, so when he landed on me, it wouldn't crush my throat. He's grabbing the back of my head, trying to pull it down, so I hit on the concrete. I'm trying to tuck up, headbutt him, and on top of that, he's trying to knee me in the cojones. I'm, in the meantime, blocking it. It was an ugly situation. That's what's going down to the ground with a trained fighter is like. I want to introduce you to two fundamental principles right now. Number one is gravity works. Gravity is a force that is always working on you. It's always working all the time. It doesn't take breaks when it's convenient or inconvenient for you. It's an ongoing process. The important thing to realize is it's not only working on you, but it's also working on your opponent. Now, gravity is a force that's pulling down, and our legs are a force that are always pulling up. Now, if you take away the support, gravity takes it down. The other thing, however, is if your base, that upward pressure, goes too far over, gravity will also take over. This is important to understand because it has a lot to do with why you'll end up on the ground. Now, the other principle I want to introduce you to, or the other fundamental, is that the human body moves in circles. Our joints move in circles. You can do this. Our body is designed to operate in circles. If we go in a straight line, most times what it is to get our body to the circumference of a circle. Basically, we just trace the radius. Now, I go into these concepts a little further and deeper in my video, Professional Use of Force, but I'd like to touch on it again here, is that the fact that our body moves in circles, it's easier, instead of trying to press straight in on somebody, to move his body along those natural circles. Just a little bit of force, and I can move him. Now, it also applies to his torso included. I can push him this way, and he can resist. However, I can also easier move him this way. Just a little bit of energy, I can get that much motion just by moving him along these circles. Something most people don't realize, and that you can use to your advantage and really exploit against them, is that balance is not a static state. You're not a statue, you're a gyroscope. It's an ongoing process with lots of subtle little details and corrections that we're not aware of. Most people aren't aware of how complicated walking really is. Now, here's somebody walking. How hard is it? It's not too difficult at all. But have you ever tried to consciously walk? The thing is, part of our psyche has just gone onto autopilot about walking. We just do it without even thinking about it. It's just an unconscious process. And unconscious processes are usually blind spots. Now, I want you to try something, and that is to consciously walk. That's stand up, and instead of just launching the program, the walk program of like, okay, do it, I want you to consciously do every stage of the process. And that is, you stand up, you shift your weight, you lift your leg, take your foot out, put it down, catch yourself, shift again, lift, step. Turn around. Now just walk back normal. Launch the walk program. One of those actions is easy. You just autopilot, you just walk. When you consciously pay attention to walking, though, you realize how delicate walking is, how complicated the process is. And with any complicated process, the only thing easy about it is messing it up. If you're that unconscious about walking, how unconscious are you about balance? We automatically stay in balance because of this part of our psyche that's always running the balance program. We just assume that being in the balance is the way it is. That's not true. People exist in what I call the cone of balance. Now the cone of balance is a cone where if we take our body outside that without counterbalancing it, we're going to fall over. Now the cone is very good at description because it gets narrower and narrower and narrower as you get further down. Now if he takes his shoulders out of the cone of balance, he goes over. However, the distance that it takes to reach the edge of the cone with his hips is slightly less. Take your hips out. The knees, even less. Until eventually, when you get to the ankles, it takes almost hardly anything to do it. Now, balance is incredibly delicate. What I was saying about gravity and our base, this is an example of it. Anytime we get outside the cone of balance, gravity takes over. So, when we walk or when we normally step, what we're doing is taking ourselves out of balance and then catching ourselves with a counter. So when he goes out of balance, he steps, catches himself. Now another point that I want to bring up is that this cone of balance also works forward. In this way. So when we can bend over this way because most times we counterbalance it, looking somewhat like Ernest Borgnine. But if we don't get that counter out, he just comes forward, goes over. Understanding this cone of balance is really important because it not only applies to you, but it also applies to the other person. And if you can affect his cone of balance, you can take him down. The problem is, if he affects your cone of balance, you're going down. This cone is a whole lot smaller than we think it is. Most people get hurt going to the ground because they hit what I call the point of no return and they don't recognize it. They've hit that point where they are going down to the ground. That's it, no ands, if, or buts. But they're still trying to get up instead of preparing and bracing for impact. That's a common mistake. You'll see it over and over again. The guy doesn't know he's going down until it's way too late. If you know this cone, if you know where it is, you can begin to brace for impact a second earlier. That'll give you an extra edge to keep yourself from getting hurt. Train for this. Go out and practice throwing yourself over. Find your cone of balance. Learn what it feels like when you reach this point of no return. This is important because most people are hurt going down to the ground because they're not prepared for it. And if you know about this and you practice for it, you train for it, you become aware of this, this spells the difference between walking away from an altercation, waking up in a hospital, or not waking up at all. Animals important safety tip number 2. Knowing when you're going to the ground is your first defense against getting hurt down there. That extra second will give you time to tuck, to roll, to prepare for it so you don't get hurt when you hit. Or, once you get the hang of that, you can move on to the next stage, which is making sure that this guy hits first. Knowing how to fall is the first line of defense in ground fighting. Number 1, first rule, is protect your head. Head injuries are the most common and the most severe injuries you can sustain going to the ground. And yet they're also the easiest to prevent. All you have to do is put your head down. Now, there's a subtle difference here between doing this and just tucking your chin. When you put your head down, what you do is that you keep your head from hitting the ground, right? Hardly any chance of him whiplashing and hitting. However, if he just tucks his chin, he's more likely to whip his head. The other thing that's important about knowing the difference between tucking your chin and putting your chin down on your chest is that if you just tuck your chin, you get a little bit of an arch, not much, but if you put your chin down, you begin to arch your back. This is critical for landing on your back and beginning to roll, because what you're going to do is curl up. Now, most throwing arts, grappling arts, do front takedowns. However, the reality of the situation is that in most fights, when somebody goes to the ground, they go down backwards. And that is why you need to curl up, you need to protect your head, because when you go over backwards, if you don't tuck or you don't curl, you don't put your head on your chest, you're going to whiplash and hit yourself on the back of the head. The next step is curling up. You've started the process by tucking your head down, but when you turn your spine into a curve, that bleeds off the energy. And the way to practice this is a really silly looking exercise, but it does work. Grab your knees and just rock back and forth. This teaches you what it feels like. If anything bumps, if anything thumps, pull it in, tuck it in. Now, one thing that makes this a little easier is be very conscious about tucking your hips in, because otherwise you'll go bam. So you rock back and forth just to get the hang of it. Now, from there, what you need to do is to start working higher and higher. Start working this way. Eventually, work your way up from where you're doing this from a squat and fall back. Now, naturally I'm going to recommend that you do this with, mats at the gym with a gymnastic instructor, etc. Take it easy on yourself. This is training. This is not abusing yourself. Eventually, when you get to this point where you can fall from here without hitting you too terribly hard, you'll be beginning to get the idea of what's necessary to survive a trip to the floor. Another really important thing to understand about falling is that you use your leg as a piston. That means when we go down, we put our legs here to slow our descent. So when we actually fall, it looks like this. Now, what we're using here is our leg, kind of like one of those air pistons or air shocks on a screen door. It's not to stop us, it's just to slow us down. It's not a brace that is going to keep us upright. Once we've hit the point of no return, we're going over. We know that already.